Oh, John Kerry's Mideast peace talks have gone nowhere. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. U.S. military and financial support for Israel's permanent occupations of the West Bank and Gaza Strip is immoral, and it threatens national security by helping generate terrorist attacks against our country. And face it, it's bad for Israel, too. Without our unlimited support, they would have much more incentive to reach a lasting peace with their neighbors. It's past time for us to make our government stop making matters worse. Help support CNI at councilforthenationalinterest.org. All right, you guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton, and on the line, I've got Kelley B. Vlahos from the American Conservative magazine. Got one hell of a great archive at antiwar.com, too. Hi, Kelley. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Hi, Scott. Thanks. I'm doing pretty good.
Good, good. Happy to talk to you again, and always happy to read you. This one is called A Blackwater World Order. Oh, what fun. So, let's talk about fascism. I mean, public-private partnerships in war. That is the same thing. This really all started with, I think, as you put it here, not even the invasion of Afghanistan. It was the invasion of Iraq that necessitated, in quotes, the rise of this new mercenary state that kind of exists fluidly throughout the world now.
Yeah. Well, I basically interviewed a gentleman by the name of Sean McFate, who's done some work as a military contractor and in the military. So he felt like he wanted to sort of get his perspective out on when he was hired as a DynCorp soldier to stop a genocide in Burundi back in 2011. But we'll put that aside for a second. So I based my story on some of the research that Sean had done on military contracting. What he found is, and what his thesis is that the outsourcing of our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were historical, and that even at one point in these wars there were more military contractors than soldiers. It was the largest outsourcing in American history of any war that we fought, and what it's done has unleashed a model and an order, world order of a magnitude across the conflict areas of the world. Basically, everybody is hiring mercenaries to fight their wars, to protect their embassies, to protect their palaces, to suppress revolts, insurgencies, protect their shipping, for humanitarian reasons. NGOs are hiring mercenaries to help them to protect their missions in conflict zones. So what his thesis is, what he contends, is that we are going back to a world order that looks more like the Middle Ages than it does in the post-Westphalian order, what he describes as the rise of sovereign states, in which states had all of the power because they had a monopoly on force. And now that we have all of these different non-state actors being able to marshal and field their own armies, so to speak, it changes the dynamic of world power and international relations. So, I mean, there's many aspects of his book that I know you'd like to talk about in terms of the rise of the mercenary, which is the name of his book. But I thought that was the most interesting because basically we've unleashed this, the United States, by outsourcing our wars. And this is something that we can't put back into the box or the genie back into the bottle, because now that it is so easy to field these private armies by anybody who has the money, and we have not only unleashed the standards, but actual people we've trained who are out there, and they are basically selling their skills to the highest bidder. And so I think it's an interesting examination. I think that your audience would be very interested in some of the research here.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I could ever get to the book with this pile of books I got to get to, but it's certainly a great article to read. And it's the kind of thing where, I'm not sure if I'm sure you must be somewhat familiar with William S. Lind and what he's written in the American Conservative in the past about the rise of fourth generation warfare on the part of those who we keep conquering and occupying and regime changing, a.k.a. obliterating the states that they had lived under, like Iraq, Libya, Syria, and created the rise of these groups that are loyal to their religion or religious leaders or local tribal elders far before any kind of nation state. And, of course, the danger of that. But so now this is sort of the American or the Western part in that. And really, I guess you're talking about Africa throughout the Middle East and everywhere. Part of the rest of the reaction to that is really kind of professionalizing these forces, which, I guess in many cases could challenge the supposed monopoly on power that many of these states or so-called states possess. Like, say, I don't know, in some of these Gulf kingdoms or something like that. What's the relative power between the hired Gestapo and the actual leaders?
Right, exactly, and that was his point. He said, back before, the rise of the power of the state, you had so many competing interests and allegiances, from principalities to the papacy, to bishops, to feudal kings, to, families fighting each other, and that set the tone for for relationships throughout the world order. And after a series of agreements and pacts in the 17th century and beyond, the sovereign state emerged, where all of these private armies and mercenary, the mercenary system was ended. It was ended because of the monopoly on force and driven underground. We've always had military contractors, but as Sean points out, that at least if we're just looking specifically at the United States military, in no war have we had this reliance on contractors. There were contractors in World War II, for example, and in Korea, which is probably the one time where it actually rises closest to the level that we had in Iraq and Afghanistan. But on the most part, we have created an actual market for mercenaries, what he calls enterprisers and mercenaries. Sean, as I say in the book, he's an ex-contractor and ex-soldier himself. So, he doesn't weigh in too definitely on whether it's a good or a bad thing. He thinks that, there's a difference between enterprisers, which is like the middleman. Hey, you pay me, I'll raise you an army, and the actual mercenaries who just basically are, the hired guns. That's a whole other debate. I think you and I agree that this is just a scary development, in world history and our history. So we'll just go with that. But his point is that there is a market now that wasn't there before, and in fact, he goes back to the 1980s when there was just this rush of to privatization, which I agree. There are many swell arguments for the free markets, but it has been extended to our military, and I don't think that that's such a good thing.
That's the thing about it, too, though, is, and I don't know a way around it, but there are two entirely different phenomena called privatization. One of them is the government F's off and leaves people alone, and if there's a problem, the market handles it. And the other is the government hires mercs to do their dirty work for them, which is an entirely different thing. When the government gives a monopoly to a company that only you get to provide cable service to everybody in this city or something like that, or that's a bad example. Water would be a better example, where you don't go from socialism to a free market, you go from socialism to fascism, which is not an improvement. And so that's really, we're not talking about Burns Security and Stanley Smith guarding the local mall. We're talking about mercenary armies of basically ex-military killers now making a killing.
Right, and he makes a great point that, hiring private contractors to go out and represent the United States in these conflict zones allows the policymakers in Washington to conduct these operations in the shadows, so they aren't put up to public scrutiny. There isn't this sense of, we're sending our men and women to go fight, in harm's way, because most people don't care about contractors. And so they can't muster up the even interest when, these contractors are fighting and dying under an American flag in some dark African nation.
Right.
So,
all right, sorry, we gotta take this break, but important point, and we'll pick it up right there on the other side of this break. Kelley Vlahos, the American Conservative magazine, a Blackwater World Order. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson knows his stuff. He made a killing running his own hedge fund and always gets out of the stock market before the government-generated bubbles pop, which is, by the way, what he's doing right now, selling all his stocks and betting on gold and commodities. Sign up at WallStreetWindow.com and get real-time updates from Mike on all his market moves. It's hard to know how to protect your savings and earn a good return in an economy like this. Mike Swanson can help. Follow along on paper and see for yourself. WallStreetWindow.com. All right, you guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. It's my show, The Scott Horton Show. I'm talking with Kelley B. Vlahos from the American Conservative magazine. This one is called A Blackwater World Order, about the unleashing of the mercs post-Iraq War, especially there. And now, I'm sorry, at the part where I had to interrupt you for the break there, I could have probably given you 5 more seconds. You were talking about how, nobody cares at all about the mercs. Nobody cries a tear for the mercs, so they're sort of like drones in the sense that they become that much easier to wage war with. It makes waging war that much easier when you have them to do it.
Yeah, I mean, if your national security policy is to extend the footprint in the Middle East, North Africa, these other conflict areas where you have convinced lawmakers and the American people there is a danger of Islamic insurgency, sending contractors out to do, the work of soldiers is a great way of conducting these operations without having to face, public scrutiny about what is happening if we're wasting our money, if we're wasting our lives, blood, and treasure. Mm-hmm. And so for as much as the United States might lament, the fact that we have unleashed this mercenary culture, we are embracing it ourselves. They're not going anywhere. So I feel that is another black stain on our record because we have found a way to fight wars without the transparency that we should be demanding of our military. So I find that that's just a very disheartening development here. And I don't think Sean McFate, the author of the book that I based this on, or anybody else has any illusions about that at all, or about it ending anytime soon, particularly as, like you said, there is this fourth-generation warfare going on, a regular warfare. McFate had, has said, this is an era of irregular warfare more than regular warfare, and I think the United States being able to command these private armies is in the best position to fight them. So there you have it.
Yeah, that was what Bill O'Reilly said. Just send some mercenaries. That way the guys we want to get killed, but we don't care about the guys that we lose. Simple Fox News logic right there. Inescapable logic, in fact, from the Empire's point of view, I guess. But, we saw, too, I guess there's an exception is some of the Blackwater guys from the Nisour Square massacre ended up being convicted. And we do see that from specialists, in the Army from time to time as well, hardly ever officers. But for the most part, it seemed like my real memory of Blackwater's role and the other mercenaries' role in the war was because they were private, but on the government contract. They had even more immunity, secrecy, impunity to get away with bloody murder than the Army did. And there's, hardly any accountability in the Army whatsoever. Right. But all the courts would say, hey, I guess it's up to Iraqi courts to prosecute them. And the Iraqi courts would say, yeah, that'd be great if, your special forces didn't evacuate them right out of the country every time we wanted to arrest them, obviously. And so they were in this kind of legal black hole, the opposite of the Guantanamo Bay kind, the kind where they get away with anything.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've been, seen this story across last week, but, Khaki, the private contractor based here in Washington that was involved in fielding these interrogators at Abu Ghraib, is being sued right now by the Iraqis who were tortured there. And their defense is, hey, we're under military contract, so we have immunity. And so I'm gonna push forward and try to do a story on that, because I find it very interesting that we have a policy that most people at this point would say is torture. The interrogation policies, practices that we pursued in that war and in Afghanistan and throughout the war on terror. We're learning so much about it now. I mean, we don't know how, if there will be any accountability here in Washington. But here we have two private contractors who basically pushed the soldiers to torture Iraqis. They're being sued by the Iraqis. What happens to them now? Like you said, there's this legal black hole gray area that's playing out right now. So their defense is, well, we're under military contract. We are military. And that's the same thing that, the contractors in, Afghanistan and Iraq that had been supposedly, putting up the incinerators are saying and didn't. And all our troops are sick from the burn pits out there. They say, hey, we're under military contract. We're immune. So I'm interested in pursuing that story at some point.
Yeah, they're like honorary cops. They can get away with whatever they want.
Yeah.
And, when you talk about how, boy, and it's not going away, I'm trying to come up with a way to make it go away. And I'm not for the nation state, but I'm for libertarianism instead, not, massive chaos and destruction and warfare in the place of these former monopolies, which is what we're talking about here with these mercenary armies. Brave New World versus jihad, says William S. Lind. But anyway, what it would take to get rid of them, just even in the short term, never mind libertarianism, but just getting rid of these mercenary groups, it would take some kind of new treaty, right? And a whole new policy adopted by America where they force the UN to force the whole world to accept some treaty that says you're not going to hire these guys anymore. And that, nope, you'll just use regular state forces as bad as they are.
Yeah, and that's
But that's not going to happen in a million years.
It's not, because, as Sean points out in the book, that a lot of these countries and regions have been hiring private contractors to guard their shipping on the high seas against pirates, and they've been very successful at it. Do you think they're going to give up protecting A, their corporate interests, or B, their sovereign interests of their state, for some higher treaty? No, because they found a way to beat back the pirates without having to expend, soldiers in their own navies. So that's not going to happen. And you have, like I mentioned before, you have monarchs like in Bahrain, in places Abu Dhabi who have active insurgencies or active, revolts. They're hiring private contractors, private security detail. So these guys aren't going to turn around and say, well, yeah, you're right. We can't hire these guys, because in many cases they're buying trust. They're buying people that they can trust. They're buying people who they know are effective. A lot of these people have been trained in the Afghan and Iraqi battlefields. So, another point that he's made is that once we start training mercenaries, and a lot of these are multinationals that have been working for us in wars, they go off and they start their own companies. So they have the skills that we gave them. They go off, they start their own teams, their own, private groups that are hiring themselves out. So we've not only made it a standard, we've also trained, these people to go out and to build their own, capital out there. So
and it's interesting that
another issue.
In absence of the empire, for example, the American Navy patrolling the entire world all day, it would make a lot of sense for companies like Walmart, for example, to have to hire their own security if they want to ship a bunch of goods from slaves in China back and forth all day, then let them. Why should they be able to socialize their security costs on everyone else? But unfortunately, we're not talking about that sort of all things being equal, free market sort of argument at all. We're talking about the aftermath of the Iraq War, where there's a million of these things, and they're, sprouting up all over the place, and they're at the higher of the states mostly, and, pretty much define corruption rather than any kind of, placing the burden on companies to take care of themselves. It's more, again, comparing the Burns Security versus Blackwater there. I don't know if Burns even exists anymore, but you know what I mean. Right.
But I mean that's an excellent point, and just taking the example of Afghanistan, our military in Afghanistan helped create private mercenary groups and operations at the warlord level. So I mean, how do you get rid of that? Because at that point, it is so ingrained into the regional politics, into the regional system. And you can sign all the treaties you want. Yeah. But once we have gotten in there and we gave the blessing to these warlords to basically become, private mercenary groups themselves, to hire out their own fighters to protect, villages and protect interests there, that's not something you can easily, you're easily just going to drive underground with some treaties and agreements or codes of conduct. Right. And I think that was his point. There's been attempts to establish some sort of code of conduct for private enterprises that have been fielding these armies and raising armies for governments and corporations. But, making everybody, subject to this would be impossible because it's gone down to the granular level and people are just hiring themselves out. And, his point was, well, you can try to let the market decide and establish some standards. And as United States government will only hire and work with those groups that, live up to those standards. But, the government itself is obviously, in so many ways, responsible for this because, they treated Blackwater and DynCorp and some of these bigger contractors as their only source. There was not a wide bidding war for these contracts. They constantly went back to DynCorp. They gave them billions of dollars through these two wars.
Right. I'm sorry, Kelley. I got to interrupt you and stop. Yeah. I'm over time, and I got to go to my next guest. But you're so great, and I appreciate your time on the show as always.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. And sorry, everybody, for cutting her off because I want to hear the rest of what she has to say, too. But go read the article. It's a Blackwater World Order. You hate government? One of them libertarian types? Or maybe you just can't stand the president, gun grabbers, or warmongers. Me too. That's why I invented LibertyStickers.com. Well, Rick owns it now, and I didn't make up all of them, but still, if you're driving around and want to tell everyone else how wrong their politics are, there's only one place to go. LibertyStickers.com has got your bumper covered. Left, right, libertarian, empire, police, state, founders quotes, central banking. Yes, bumper stickers about central banking. Lots of them. And, well, everything that matters. LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. Hey, all, Scott Horton here. It's always safe to say that one should keep at least some of your savings in precious metals as a hedge against inflation. And if this economy ever does heat back up and the banks start expanding credit, rising prices could make metals a very profitable bet. Since 1977, Robertson Roberts Brokerage Inc. has been helping people buy and sell gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, and they do it well. They're fast, reliable, and trusted for more than 35 years. And they take Bitcoin. Call Robertson Roberts at 1-800-874-9760 or stop by rrbi.co. Hey, you own a business? Maybe we should consider advertising on the show. See if we can make a little bit of money. My email address is scott@scotthorton.org.